Hi, welcome to another episode of Horror Score. We're your hosts, Jesse.
And Vanessa.
This week's episode is...
The Greasy Strangler.
Yeah. Man, if you have not seen this movie, currently it came out in 2016, and this was both of our first watch.
Yes.
What a ride. Don't watch this movie with your parents, whatever you do.
Your parents?
Yeah.
How old are you? You mean don't watch it with your children, adults?
Also, don't watch it with your children, but don't watch it with your parents. Yeah. I feel like it would be super awkward to watch this movie.
Don't go to your local nursing home and watch it with the old fogies there.
Oh yeah, it's got a lot of awkward moments. It's pretty much like a Tim and Eric episode with very, very, very awkward sequences.
I enjoy Tim and Eric.
Did you not enjoy this movie? This movie is it's one of those things where if I never see it again, that's okay. But I feel like I want other people to see it now, and that's what happened to us.
That's how we ended up watching it.
That's right. Horror Movie Mike at a cookout it was a social distancing
we were just
cookout.
Unsuspectedly approached with this movie recommendation.
It's like, have you guys seen this? And I get it now because he had brought it up several times before. It didn't really click. He didn't want to come over and watch it with us. He was like, oh, you guys got to check it out. And that's the problem. This is a movie you want other people to suffer through so then you can talk to them afterwards, but you don't want to see it a second time.
It was like the director was like, I love old David Lynch films. Like, I love Eraserhead. But I wish Eraserhead was 10 times more awkward and uncomfortable.
And it's okay that it's awkward and uncomfortable. And this movie has a very high production value, and it does a lot of things right. It's just a ride, and you're like, and it finds lots of different ways to just be gross.
Yeah, you're just a captive.
Yeah. We checked a couple times to be like, how many minutes are left on this movie? Let's just pause real quick. 48 minutes left. Okay. Let's dive back in.
And how long was the original cut of this film?
I read that the original cut, this movie was 1 hour and 33 minutes. Feels a little bit longer.
It's a great amount of time.
It's a good movie length. Apparently, the original cut of this movie is 2 hours and 15 minutes. And if that version exists, that is the only way that I will probably ever watch this movie again, unless I'm invited to a Greasy Strangler party, and then I would watch it a second time. I said it. So we're going to get into scoring this gem, unless you got anything else to bring up before...
Just saying you're going stag to that party, if that party ever happens.
Noted.
Let's go into story.
All right. Do you want to start with story, or do you want me to start with story?
I'll start.
All right. Take it away.
So, it's a classic father and son movie. If that classic father and son duo are both in love with the same woman, and there's a serial killer on the loose.
Tale as old as time. What'd you give it?
I gave it an 8.
I also gave it an 8. The story's nothing original, but every character is definitely a character. Sort of like, some of them really one-dimensional, but every character that you meet is really outlandish, ridiculous.
So they have a business, and they're disco tour guides. That on paper sounds wonderful and great, and I would just watch a movie that's based on that. But they just stand out. They have tours of 3 or 4 people, and they just wear matching pink jumpsuits, and they stand outside of brick buildings and say, that's where so-and-so recorded blank.
In the movie, it does have a formula. It's them giving a tour, their home life, and then a murder.
Right.
Then it's them giving a tour the next day, their terrible home life.
Creatures of habit.
And then another murder.
And grease.
There's a lot of grease. It's very gross.
There's a lot of strangling and grease. We have to say that it was not a misleading title in any way.
Yeah, you get what you're
yeah.
What you're clicking on there.
So how did you feel about the villain?
All right. I gave the villain a 4. I haven't given a score this low since the robots from Shopping Mall, but it wasn't that I just hated him. It's the villain. When you're looking at a good villain, he's an old man who's naked who's covered in grease.
It's the father. The father is the villain.
Yeah, and that's no surprise. There's no spoilers here. You could tell. First time you
From
see him, you're
line
like,
one.
there he is.
line
Yeah,
one.
line
He's a
one, he says to
bastard.
his son, like, I'm not the Greasy Strangler. And his son's like, oh, okay.
You're not.
I
then.
guess.
Sure.
You're not. Sure. Yeah. I didn't like him. I know you're supposed to hate a villain sometimes, like in the movie The Patriot. You really hate that villain. But I did not like him. What'd you give him?
I gave him a 12.
That's way higher than what I
Because
gave
he
him.
is easily the most detestable person I've ever seen in a movie, and that says a lot. That's an accomplishment to me. But I do have to say one thing about that. One of my favorite forms. This is like an absurd, comedy kind of movie. One of my favorite forms of comedy is just bathroom humor. I think there is nothing as funny as bathroom humor. It could be like the most elevated joke in the world that hits a bunch of notes. No, bathroom humor wins every time because it's so universally acceptable. As you know, everybody poops. Nobody's left out of a bathroom humor joke or fart joke. Like, nobody gets left out of it. Here's my problem with this villain. He uses farts for evil instead of good. And it's just senseless butt violence from start to finish.
I thought it was weird because there's a lot of fart references and scenes, and I looked over and she wasn't laughing.
That's unheard of.
And I'm like, what's the matter? And she's like, he's just terrible. And I was like, wow, all right.
It wasn't to make anybody laugh, it was to hurt them.
Yeah, well, speaking of hurting people, that's going to be covered in the horror category, which we should move on to. And would you like to start us off?
I gave horror a 6. Because, like I said, it's more of like an absurd comedy than a horror film. Although horrific, stomach-turning things do occur.
Yeah, I felt a lot of things, a lot of negative emotions.
Yeah.
Not a lot of it was horror, though.
No.
What'd you give it again?
A 6.
A 6.
A 6.
I think I actually scored a category higher than you. I gave it a 10. There's 10 deaths, 10 points. And normally, I don't necessarily always do that. There's movies where 26 people get killed. But when trying to find horror in this movie, that was the only place to look because you're never afraid. There's no jump scares. You're not afraid of the villain. It's more of a comedy.
They're very clear and out and open with things. Like, so
Yeah.
there's no hiding. It's a lot of full frontal.
There's a lot of full frontal in this movie. A lot. There's just nudity constantly.
Yeah. How do you feel about effects?
Well, I hated the music. It's the same song over and over and over again. And sometimes they sing, or they'll sing a little thing in this movie, and they'll sing like a line over and over and over and over and over again, and you're like, they're gonna stop any second, and they don't. But their practical effects on a couple of the deaths were really good, and in a lot of these nude scenes with these people, apparently there's some prosthetics, and we didn't know for a while. So the effects were good enough so that we had to look online to find out if we were looking at real naked people or a prosthetic, and it was a prosthetic.
I'm really glad it was a prosthetic. It was one of the most upsetting things I've seen.
Oh, I gave it a 13, by the way. I gave it 13 points for effects. That was the highest category for this movie, for me.
I gave it a 10. There were some cool eyeball moments in all of, most of the death scenes, especially towards the end of the movies. There were some great practical effects that, like I said earlier, reminded me of Eraserhead or something that David Lynch would do. But just kind of bizarre, absurd things that happen. They have a friend with like a pig nose, and the blind man at the car wash and all of that. Just very creative.
There was a man whose face gets punched in early in the movie that I wanted, when the movie started, I was like, oh, is that what kind of movie this is? And I wanted more of that. Yeah. And I wish we got more deaths like that one.
We were just holding on to that one scene, more, and then we didn't really get it until the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie.
But a lot of people just get strangled, as the title
the camera
suggests.
Gets strangled a lot. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of you're watching the Greasy Strangler strangle the camera, basically.
Now, our final category is the S factor, which the idea we've stolen from Doomsday Preppers, where we can award some extra points for whatever reasons we decided, anywhere up to 20 points. Do you want to take us into S factor?
I give it 11 points. Because of the near constant nudity. It's just all three of our main characters, I think in like 60 to 80% of the film, are just completely naked.
All the time.
Yeah, as much as we might not want it.
For S factor, I simply gave this movie 8 more points for the constant usage of the term bullshit artist, which they say over and over and over again throughout the entire movie. I noticed they said it like 3 times in the opening scene, so I started keeping track. I got a little notepad out, and I caught 28 uses of the term bullshit artist, which is also the name of the documentary about this movie that came out in 2017, which I have not seen, but I would watch.
And it feels like a lot more than that. And
Definitely.
Maybe you should have started to count the amount of times they chanted hootie tootie disco cutie. Because if I never have to hear that phrase again. Or, oh God, hear the phrase creamy cocktail.
Yeah, gross. So if we've got nothing else for you at this point, before we total these up, we're gonna move on to Vanessa's 1-sentence synopsis.
Can this father and son put aside their many differences to discover that what they've been looking for has been in front of them the whole time?
So there you have it. I gave this movie a grand total of 43 horror score points. I thought it was going to do worse. I thought I was going to give it less points because as I was scoring it, I was like, well, I have to give them points here. Got to give them points here. So 43.
I gave it 47 because it was horrifying. It was a horrifying film, and you got to give points where points are due, which is a combined total of 45 points.
So 45 reasons to watch this movie or not. But if you do watch it, don't invite us to the party. So give us 15 minutes. We might save you 2 hours, or in this case, 1 hour and 33 minutes.
Stay spooky.